The bright green citation under my windshield wiper might as well have been a declaration of war. $79 for improper lawn maintenance? You've got to be kidding me. I stood in my police chief uniform, coffee in one hand, staring at my perfectly maintained yard, while the sound of designer heels clicked purposefully up my driveway. Section 7, Paragraph 3, Karen Mitchell announced, not bothering with a greeting. Grass exceeding 3 inches is a violation. Yours is approximately 3.5 inches. She tapped her iPad with a manicured nail, eyes never meeting mine. The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours. Oh, and those garden gnomes? Not approved decorations. The gnomes my late wife had collected. The ones our daughter had painted together. What Karen didn't realize as she strutted away, she hadn't just targeted another frustrated homeowner. She'd declared war on the chief of police, and I was about to uncover the criminal enterprise hiding behind her clipboard and rulebook. I took a deep breath, remembering my training in dealing with difficult people. I've been working a major case this week. I'll mow it this weekend. The fine doubles if not paid within 72 hours, she chirped, finally looking up. And those garden gnomes? Not on the approved decoration list. My garden gnomes? The collection my late wife had cherished? I felt my blood pressure rising but kept my voice steady. I wasn't aware we needed approval for decorations that have been here for over a decade. New board, new rules. She waved her tablet cheerfully. We're bringing this neighborhood into the modern age. No more tacky decorations lowering property values. As she clicked away down the sidewalk, I noticed she was stopping at Sarah's house next door. Sarah was an ER nurse who had just finished a grueling night shift. The last thing she needed was Karen's morning harassment about garbage bins. I watched as Karen started photographing Sarah's property, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about my lawn or my gnomes anymore. In my 25 years of law enforcement, I'd learned to spot patterns of harassment and abuse of power. Karen wasn't just being strict. She was targeting specific residents. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the neighborhood Facebook group. The complaints about Karen were multiplying. Mark, the firefighter on the corner, had been fined for his kid's basketball hoop. The elderly couple across the street got a violation for their unapproved rose bushes. Even the local teacher had been cited for parking his too old and unsightly car in his own driveway. I was about to pull out when I spotted Karen taking more pictures of my gnomes. She didn't know it yet, but she had just made a serious mistake. Being chief of police had taught me that sometimes the biggest crimes aren't the ones that make headlines, but the small injustices that chip away at a community's spirit. As I drove to work, my mind was already forming a plan. Karen thought she had all the power, but she had no idea who she was really dealing with, or what I would discover when I started digging into her perfect facade. By lunchtime, I had Deputy Rodriguez run a preliminary background check. Karen Mitchell had moved from 3 different neighborhoods in the past 5 years, each time after serving on HOA boards that faced resident complaints. Chief, Rodriguez said, sliding a folder across my desk. Her brother runs a private security company that just got the contract for our neighborhood. Outbid the company that served us for 15 years. I raised an eyebrow. Any connection between the security contract and her joining the board? She proposed the security upgrade 2 days after being elected. Pushed it through an emergency session when half the board couldn't attend. Interesting timing, I murmured, flipping through the documents. Let's see what else we can find. 2 days later, I returned home after a brutal double shift handling a bank robbery downtown. All I wanted was to park my car and get some sleep, but what I found made my jaw clench. 2 black SUVs with HOA security, plastered on the sides, completely blocking my driveway. Karen Mitchell strutted across my front lawn in her designer suit, tablet in hand, taking pictures of everything from my garden hose to my welcome mat. Each flash of her camera made my blood pressure rise a little more, but I kept my cool. 20 years on the force taught me that losing your temper never solves anything. Excuse me, I called out, stepping from my car. You're blocking my driveway, and I need to get to my garage. Karen spun around, her perfectly styled blonde hair swishing like a shampoo commercial. Well, if it isn't Mr. Johnson, our neighborhood's most persistent rule breaker, She tapped her tablet screen with long red nails. Let's see. Unpaid fine for lawn height violation, unapproved garden gnome placement, and now, she paused for dramatic effect, non-regulation mailbox color. I couldn't help but laugh. Non-regulation mailbox color? The mailbox is white. It's been white for the 15 years I've lived here. According to our new guidelines approved last week, all mailboxes must be painted pristine pearl white from the Anderson Paint Company collection. Your mailbox is clearly classic white, a completely different shade. She smiled like she'd just solved a murder case. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Karen, I understand you're new to the neighborhood, but these security vehicles are parked illegally. They're blocking access to my property, which is a violation of City Ordinance 20-345. Her smile flickered momentarily. I have full authority as HOA board member to enforce our community standards. These security officers, she gestured to two men in ill-fitting uniforms leaning against their SUVs, are here to ensure compliance. That's when I noticed something odd about their badges. They looked almost like real police badges, but not quite. As chief of police, I knew every licensed security company in our jurisdiction, and Mitchell Security Solutions wasn't one of them. I took a deep breath and decided to try reason one more time. Look, I get that you're trying to maintain property values, but blocking someone's driveway over a $79 fine isn't just unreasonable, it's illegal. I'd hate to have to escalate this. Karen's face turned the same color as her nails. Is that a threat, Mr. Johnson? Because I have photos documenting every violation on your property, and the HOA board will be very interested in your aggressive attitude. She turned to the security guards. Make a note of his threatening behavior. As they fumbled with their notepads, I noticed their shoulder patches were peeling off. They looked like they'd been printed at a local copy shop. Something wasn't adding up, and my cop instincts were kicking in hard. I pulled up the city's business license database on my phone, keeping one eye on Karen as she continued photographing my property. 3 taps later, I had what I needed, or rather, what wasn't there. No licensed security company registered under her name or her brother's. Just then, Mrs. Garcia from next door came rushing out in her nurse's scrubs. Chief Johnson, I'm so glad you're here. They've been blocking my driveway too, and I'm late for my hospital shift. I watched Karen's face closely as she heard the word chief. Her eyes widened slightly, and her tablet nearly slipped from her fingers. But instead of backing down, she lifted her chin higher. Your title doesn't matter here, Chief Johnson. HOA rules apply to everyone equally. I never expected a simple lawn dispute to uncover something so disturbing in our peaceful neighborhood. It started when Sarah, the ER nurse who lives 3 houses down, knocked on my door at 6 a.m., still in her scrubs and fighting back tears. She had just finished a brutal overnight shift dealing with a bus crash, only to find her entire front yard plastered with bright orange violation notices. Chief, she said, her hands shaking as she held up the stack of papers. They're threatening to put a lien on my house because my garbage bin stayed out for an extra day while I was working a double shift during the crisis. The sight of this dedicated nurse who had just spent 16 hours saving lives being harassed over garbage bins made my blood boil. But Sarah wasn't alone. As I started asking around, more stories emerged. Mark, the firefighter on Maple Street, showed me citation after citation for his kid's basketball hoop. The same hoop that had been there for 5 years without issue before Karen joined the board. The Martinez family got fined because their Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past Karen's arbitrary deadline. They'd been at their grandmother's funeral. I sat at my kitchen table that evening, spreading out all the complaints like pieces of a puzzle. The pattern was clear as day. Karen wasn't just being picky. She was specifically targeting homes where people worked long or irregular hours. First responders, nurses, doctors, firefighters, people who couldn't always be home to jump at her every demand. My police instincts kicked in. I started mapping out every citation issued in the past 3 months since Karen took power. The cluster of violations formed a clear pattern around homes of emergency workers and those who opposed her during the HOA election. This wasn't random. This was calculated harassment. Then my phone buzzed, a text from Tom, my deputy, who lived in the next subdivision. "Chief, you're not going to believe this. Remember that flooding issue last spring? Just found out Karen's brother's company got the contract for drainage repair. Cost 3 times what the other bids quoted." I leaned back in my chair, thinking about how Karen had laughed in my face earlier that day when I tried to reason with her about my own fine. "Rules are rules," she'd said, that smug smile never leaving her face. But now I understood, these weren't rules. This was a power trip, and possibly something even more sinister. Just then, my doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Chun from across the street, an elderly widow who'd lived here longer than anyone. "Chief," she whispered, looking over her shoulder nervously. "I saw them installing cameras on the streetlights today. They didn't ask permission. Karen says it's for security, but they're all pointed at specific houses, including yours." My jaw tightened. Unauthorized surveillance in my jurisdiction? Now Karen wasn't just being a nuisance. She was potentially breaking the law, but I needed more proof before I could act. If I moved too quickly, she'd play the victim, claim I was abusing my position as chief. As I walked Mrs. Chin home, I spotted Karen in her driveway talking to 2 men I'd never seen before. They wore uniforms from her brother's security company, but something about them seemed off. My gut told me there was more to this story, and in 20 years of police work, my gut had rarely been wrong. I closed my eyes, remembering what my mentor used to say, "The bigger they are, the harder they fall." Karen had built herself a little kingdom of fear and intimidation, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd gotten too confident, too sloppy. She didn't realize that while she was watching us, we were watching her too. I couldn't sleep that night, thinking about how Karen had been treating everyone in our neighborhood. Something didn't feel right about the whole situation. While drinking my morning coffee, I remembered an important lesson from my early days as a rookie cop. Follow the money. The security company blocking my driveway had seemed oddly eager to do Karen's bidding, and their uniforms looked suspiciously new. At work, I asked Jenny from our records department to run a basic business check on the security company, Elite Neighborhood Watch Services. Within minutes, my suspicions grew stronger. The company had only been registered 3 months ago, right after Karen joined the HOA board. The owner's last name matched Karen's maiden name, and the business address led to a P.O. box instead of a real office. I drove by Sarah's house on my lunch break. She was just getting home from her hospital shift, looking exhausted. "Chief," she called out when she saw me. "They left another notice this morning. I can't keep paying these fines on a nurse's salary." She showed me a stack of violation notices, all signed by Karen, all citing obscure HOA rules that seemed to target working people specifically. Back at the station, I dug deeper into public records. Karen's brother, Tom Mitchell, had a history of failed security companies in 3 different states. Each time, complaints had been filed about aggressive tactics and unauthorized vehicle blocking, but they'd always disappeared before any real investigation could start. My next stop was the county clerk's office. The friendly clerk, Mrs. Rodriguez, helped me pull HOA registration documents from the last 6 months. Flipping through the pages, I found exactly what I needed. Karen had never disclosed her family connection to the security company when bidding for the HOA contract. That was a clear violation of the HOA's own conflict of interest rules. But the real gold mine came when I checked Karen's home business registration. She'd been running a daycare center from her garage, caring for 6 kids at a time. The HOA rules strictly prohibited commercial activities, the very same rules she'd been using to fine other neighbors for having home offices. Even better, she didn't have proper childcare licensing from the state. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark, the firefighter. "Chief, you need to see this." He sent me photos of Karen's security company cars parked in fire lanes around the neighborhood. As a firefighter, he knew exactly how dangerous this was. "We couldn't get a truck through there if we needed to," his message read. I spent the rest of the afternoon building my case. Property maps showed Karen had extended her back fence 2 feet beyond her property line. Security camera footage from my cruiser proved her company had blocked emergency vehicle access multiple times. The HOA's financial records revealed she'd been pushing the board to increase fines while directing all security contracts to her brother's company. The evidence was mounting, but I had to be smart about how I used it. Karen had friends on the city council, and I needed to make sure everything was completely legal and properly documented. I made copies of every document and stored them in both digital and physical formats. Years of police work had taught me to always have backups. Just as I was finishing up, Officer Rodriguez rushed into my office. "Chief, you won't believe this. That security company tried to boot Dr. Thompson's car at the emergency room entrance. He was rushing in for a critical surgery." My blood boiled, but I kept my cool. This was the final piece I needed. Walking into that HOA meeting, my heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. Karen stood at the front of the room in her designer suit, waving around a stack of papers about her new community safety program. I watched as she talked about hiring more security guards and adding cameras on every street. The whole room seemed tired of her rules, but everyone was too scared to speak up. I waited until she finished her speech about protecting our property values. Then, just as she asked for votes, I raised my hand. The familiar weight of my badge in my pocket gave me strength. "Before we vote," I said, standing up slowly, "I think there's something everyone needs to know." Karen's eyes narrowed, not recognizing me out of uniform. "I'm Chief Anderson, and I've been investigating some concerning issues." I pulled out my own stack of papers, property records, business licenses, and photos. The projector clicked on, showing Karen's illegal home business setup, clear as day. "These pictures show an unlicensed daycare operation running out of your house, Mrs. Mitchell. That's against both HOA rules and state regulations." Karen's face turned red. "How dare you? This is private property." "Public records aren't private," I replied calmly, changing to the next slide. "Neither is this business registration showing your brother owns Safe Shield Security, the same company now patrolling our streets without proper licensing." The room erupted in whispers. I continued, "While you've been fining Sarah Thompson, our local ER nurse, for leaving her trash bins out an extra hour after her night shifts, you've been running an illegal business. While you cited Mark Rodriguez's kids for their basketball hoop, your security company has been operating without permits." Mrs. Chun from down the street stood up. She fined me $200 for my Chinese New Year decorations. Others joined in, sharing their stories of Karen's targeted harassment. Karen tried to grab her papers and storm out, but the HOA president, Mr. Jenkins, blocked the door. "Not so fast, Karen. We need to discuss this." I shared evidence of every unfair fine, every made-up rule, and every double standard. The room got louder with each revelation. Parents who'd been fined for their kids' chalk drawings spoke up. Senior citizens shared how they'd been harassed about their garden gnomes and bird baths. "And here's the biggest problem," I said, showing the final slide. "The security company has been writing tickets and blocking driveways without any legal authority to do so. That's impersonating law enforcement, a serious offense." Karen's perfect mask finally cracked. "You can't prove anything. I was making this neighborhood better. These people need rules. Rules apply to everyone," I replied, "including you." The room burst into applause. Mr. Jenkins called for an emergency vote, and hands shot up across the room. Karen wasn't just removed from the board. She was banned from ever serving again. As she finally pushed past everyone to leave, she turned back with tears of rage in her eyes. "This isn't over," she shouted. But looking at our united neighbors, I knew it was. Sometimes justice wears a badge, and sometimes it just needs someone to stand up and tell the truth. The next day, I noticed something rare. The story of our neighborhood's revolt against HOA tyranny spread like wildfire. By the end of the week, 3 local news stations had interviewed me and other residents. The headline in the County Times read, "Police Chief Exposes Corruption in Suburban HOA Scandal." Karen's brother's security company was under investigation by the state licensing board, and the district attorney was reviewing evidence of fraud and impersonation of law enforcement. The city council called an emergency session to review regulations for homeowners associations operating within city limits. What surprised me most was how quickly other neighborhoods reached out. Emails and calls poured in from communities across the state, all sharing similar stories of HOA boards abusing their power. One woman from Riverside sent me screenshots of her HOA president fining residents who had opposed him in the last election. A retired veteran from Oakwood shared documentation of his HOA targeting homes with service flags and military decorations. "Your story gave us courage," he wrote. "We're organizing our own meeting next week." The media coverage intensified when investigators discovered Karen and her brother had pulled similar schemes in 2 other states before moving here. A national morning show invited me to discuss HOA overreach and how homeowners can protect themselves. The segment went viral with millions of views online. Social media exploded with hashtag HOA watchdog and hashtag know your rights hashtags. Legal experts published articles explaining homeowners' rights and the limits of HOA authority. Community organizers created templates for residents to challenge unfair rules and practices. Back in our neighborhood, the transformation was remarkable. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Thompson and Mark, immediately reversed Karen's most punitive rules. Garden gnomes returned to front yards. Basketball hoops were reinstalled. The elderly couple across the street planted a rainbow of flowers that would have given Karen a conniption. Most importantly, we established new guidelines requiring transparency in all HOA decisions. Board meetings were now recorded and shared online. Financial records were open for review. Any new rule required a 75% majority vote from all homeowners, not just board members. The security cameras Karen had installed were removed, except for those at community entrances that residents voted to keep. Her brother's company was replaced with a legitimate local security firm that focused on actual safety concerns rather than petty rule enforcement. Even city officials took notice. The mayor invited me to join a task force on community governance, focused on preventing HOA abuse and ensuring fair housing practices. 3 council members who had previously supported Karen's aggressive enforcement tactics suddenly became champions of homeowner rights. Local newspapers ran editorials praising our neighborhood's stand against suburban authoritarianism. A law professor from the state university published a paper using our case as an example of how communities can peacefully resist administrative overreach. As for Karen, she and her brother quietly moved away within a month. A for sale sign appeared in her yard one morning, and by the weekend, moving trucks were loading her designer furniture. According to social media, she tried joining another HOA board 2 towns over, but mysteriously, her application was rejected. Someone had apparently shared our story with that community. The last I heard, she was considering a move to Florida, perhaps hoping for a fresh start where her reputation hadn't preceded her. But in the age of internet and interconnected communities, I suspected she would find it harder to build her little kingdom of rules and fear. Hashtag lesson and message, 15 to 1640. 200 words. Our neighborhood learned valuable lessons from this experience. First, that community is built on mutual respect, not rigid control. When rules become weapons rather than guidelines, they destroy the very thing they claim to protect: our homes and our sense of belonging. Second, we discovered the power of standing together. Karen's tactics worked because she isolated people, making each homeowner feel alone in their struggle. Once we started sharing our stories, her power evaporated like morning dew. Most importantly, we learned that justice often requires courage, the courage to speak up when it would be easier to stay silent, to document wrongdoing when it would be simpler to pay the fine, to confront power when it would be safer to comply. As a police officer, I've always believed my duty extends beyond enforcing laws to protecting the community's well-being. Sometimes that means investigating major crimes, but other times it means defending your neighbor's right to display garden gnomes without harassment. True security doesn't come from cameras on every corner or fines for every infraction. It comes from neighbors who look out for each other, who value kindness over conformity, and who understand that a community's strength lies in its diversity, not its uniformity. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. Thousands of homeowners face similar situations every day, feeling powerless against unreasonable rules and those who enforce them with an iron fist. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Have you dealt with an overzealous HOA? Did you find ways to push back? Or are you currently struggling with a Karen in your neighborhood? Share your story and let others know they're not alone. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed this account of neighborhood justice. It helps more people find this video and learn about their rights as homeowners. Subscribe to my channel for more stories about community advocacy, knowing your rights, and standing up to bullies in all their forms, whether they carry clipboards or badges. Until next time, this is Chief Anderson, reminding you that sometimes the most important policing happens right in our own backyards. Remember, the information in this video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. HOA rules and laws vary by state and community, so always consult with a legal professional before taking action in your specific situation.